So the session today is looking at factual programming, documentaries for the next generation. I'm Margrie. I'm a commissioning exec for CBBC, the BBC's children's channel that's for 6 to 12-year-olds. Very, very lucky to have Kat Lewis with us, who runs 9 Lives Media, and Rachel Drummond-Hay, who is from Drummer TV, runs Drummer TV, Alison Gregory, who is a freelance exec. All 3 make fantastic content for kids, which is why they are here, as well as other content. And Claire Hoang, who is our channel manager for our YouTube channels on CBBC and CBBC, who I think will have some interesting things to say about where things are going. So, to kick off, just to set into context where children are. So for the purposes of this, we thought we would focus on 10 to 12-year-old children because we know that a 6-year-old has very different needs to a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, and that this age group is in a very particular state because they want to be older than they are. They're not supposed to be engaging with social media. Most social media sites say nobody under 13 should be using it. We know they are, but they're also at a time of change in terms of schools. Within this bracket, they're moving up to secondary school, where everything changes. And so a few kind of interesting stats in that boys and girls begin to separate a bit, and boys begin to have their own games, and they like gaming with consoles. Girls tend to want to engage with social media. They have an increasing capacity to make judgments, having views on the world, which I think is interesting in terms of the documentaries that are being made and the factual programming, and the importance of friendship and what your friends think is really key for this audience. The kind of stuff they're looking at when they're not, obviously, watching TV. And we do know that kids are still watching TV. And CBBC, particularly, is the most watched channel of all the children's channels in the UK. But nevertheless, boys particularly are gaming a lot. And girls are on Instagram sharing content, Pinterest. And that will be the biggest challenge for us, I think, moving forward. Favourite TV shows amongst this audience are much more aspirational than you might think. So they are accessing content that isn't made for them, but they're finding something in there that resonates. Social media usage and online, which you can see the line across the top, it increases, particularly once children go to secondary school in year 7. And, I mean, you'll have a bit more to say about that, but lots of sharing of content, particularly amongst girls. And we thought this was interesting in terms of the devices that children have. And we know now that I think it's 71% of households with children have a tablet. I think 76% of children from 7 to 16 have access to a smartphone. And now more children are watching CBBC on iPlayer via a mobile device than they are on desktop computers. And that's just going up year on year. So we need to be mindful of that. And they're obviously accessing apps and games. Minecraft is particularly popular. And increasingly Netflix as well. There's Netflix Kids now, so there's lots of different ways that children are accessing content. But I think in terms of what we want to talk about today is what that content is and why it's important still to make great stuff for young people. And I'd like to hand over to Kat, who's going to talk about a film that you made for us on CBBC that I thought was particularly powerful.
So we made a film called I Am Leo. It was one of my assistant producers who came up with the idea because Leo is one of the first kids in the country to have hormone blocking treatment. I've made a number of films with adult transgender people, and what was really interesting is this hormone-blocking treatment. When young people absolutely know, it takes a long time for them to be prescribed. They have to go through quite a lot of interviews, and we work closely with the film, with the Tavistock Centre to make sure that we've got all the kind of medical side right. But the reason we felt it was important was just because a lot of young people who are transgender, the statistics show that they're more likely to attempt suicide or self-harm. So there was a real reason for them, for us to make this film so that we can kind of widen the circle of compassion and understanding. Because I do believe that children aren't born with prejudice, and so what that means is that if you make programmes that teach them about difference, they will accept that, and then the world, hopefully will become a better place. There'll be less bullying. And I think one of the things that worked really well in the film was Leo's video diary, which is really interesting because he kept saying to us, I don't bother watching it, And our team, my production team, Lindsay, the AP, who'd come up with the idea, and also the producer-director, they had to kind of really encourage Leo to record video diary after we'd done any kind of filming with him, and also just whenever we were kind of encouraging him, whenever he felt he had something to say, that he should use his video diary. And so you'll see this clip that I've got is some of his video diary. So we felt it was also about identity, that the universal theme that every child, the desire to find your identity and be accepted for who you are. So we made sure that we did things like film Leo, his present school, so that other children could immediately identify with him and see that actually, he wasn't a different person. He was somebody, who, is fantastically eloquent and, absolutely has every right to be accepted.
And I think what I thought was really interesting about the way you found him was that he was already out in the public eye, wasn't he? So you weren't kind of putting this kid in a more vulnerable position than perhaps he would have wanted to be in. He was...
That's right. Because he'd already told his story, he'd shared his secret about, having been born a girl, because he'd actually been... he has been living as a boy since he was about 5 or 6, although he had problems at primary school, not just being bullied by other pupils, but being bullied by the staff. And we were very careful, we did mention that in the film because we felt it was really important, but we were very careful not to identify anybody. But nevertheless, we had a lot of evidence, obviously, to show that had happened. But because he'd already told his story, that meant that we weren't, outing him, if you like. And also, we worked very closely with Emma Kenny, who's a fantastic child psychologist, and she talked to Leo and his sister and Leo's parents about the potential long-term impact, because all our films are immortal effectively today because of online. So you've got to be absolutely sure that a child is capable of dealing with any fallout. Haven't you, Kaz? That's really important.
Yeah, no, really. And I just wondered, because you make a lot of content not for children, whether you approach this differently because it was aimed at a younger audience.
Yeah, we absolutely did, and I think, it provides kind of natural creative boundaries, which I think, or editorial boundaries, which force you to think more creatively. When people make films with transgender people, it's usually following a journey through treatment, transition, or, something of that type, which wasn't appropriate for a child audience. So we found a narrative which was that Leo had only got a passport in his girl's name and really wanted to get a boy's passport, and that provided a really good beginning, middle and end. So we still had a structure to the film, but it was one that would help kind of explain. And also, I think it's fantastic that Britain will accept with both parents' permission the change of gender identity. And obviously the Tavistock, were very supportive of that as well. And so it was fantastic that he. I'm going to give it away, but he got his now.
It was a key time for him as well, wasn't it? Because it was beginning of puberty, which I understand is quite a momentous moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty, certainly when I've worked closely with transgender adults, and I have some close friends who are transgender as well, that actually the difficult thing is going through puberty and then having into the gender that you don't want to be in, and then having to reverse that. So this possibility of treatment, the hormone blocking treatment, which if you stop taking the hormone blocking drugs, it kind of reverses immediately. So it is, as we kind of illustrate in the film, it is just pausing, your hormones. So it pauses puberty, so you don't end up in the gender with which you don't identify. So it is a very progressive treatment, but equally we had to kind of explain it, to both parents and children. We made sure we showed the film to a number of kind of 6 to 12-year-olds and got their feedback while we were still in edit to make sure we were, making it very understandable. And we did have boundaries as well. For example, even though a lot of children have said, transgender children, self-harm and attempt suicide, we made sure that we didn't kind of get into that territory at all. It's quite interesting. There's been an Australian documentary made about transgender children recently, and that kind of talks about suicide all the way through it, whereas we deliberately kind of didn't go down that route, even though it was a strong motivation for making the film. We were talking earlier about whether or not there are topics that you wouldn't cover for children, and that was one we felt was probably too over the edge, but generally it's how you do it.
About the resolution, I'm sorry. But just about the resolution as well, because I mean, even if you go through difficult issues through the programme, as long as you kind of come out with a resolution at the end that's positive and you can see that journey, then I think you can kind of go into quite difficult areas.
And what was the response after the film went out?
It did very well. We got complaints from people who just didn't want that subject dealt with for their children. But we got lots and lots of lovely emails and comments from young people who felt for the first time they'd been acknowledged, I guess. But also, you did a YouTube kind of connection to it, and forgive me, but I am going to try and get the link up. If I am... No, I'm not connected still. So would you like to talk a bit about how you...
So I suppose, we know that kids are on YouTube. We also knew as well this was going to be something that could potentially have quite an emotive response. A lot of people would have strong views on it. And what we wanted to do was, instead of actually just taking a clip from the show, which is what we normally do on the channels, and put something that might look like it's slightly out of context, we actually went, okay, well, what can we do with this that can, one, potentially just very quickly summarise Leo's story, but two, is a YouTube format, so kids who are used to watching specific things on that platform can get used to it.
So that was a different way of using material and bringing him much more to the fore, talking directly to the audience.
And the other thing that we knew as well, because one, it would kind of hopefully whet an appetite for people who kind of wanted to watch the documentary. Two, what we did was we worked with what's called a tentpole moment. So a tentpole moment is something that you kind of know is going to happen as an event throughout the year. So we knew Anti-Bullying Week was coming, and we could use Anti-Bullying Week as a way to introduce Leo, but also use the anti-bullying message as a way of preempting any issues that might come up in case anyone made any negative comments. And then three, because of the fact that it's not necessarily just a clip out of context that relates to something that you've got to see the rest of the thing, you can actually watch that at any point. You can watch that now and it will make sense. You can watch it 6 months ago and it will make sense. So it also had that kind of evergreen ability as well. So should Leo come back up again in the press and people search for it, because that's pretty much how people use YouTube, they use it as a search engine, then we would have something on there that would have a really positive representation of what he kind of was doing, really, rather than something that was small in that context.
I think it's really powerful. I don't know about you, but I think it's really powerful. You, Rachel, also make My Lives,
yes,
and Joanne's film, which is very different to that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Joanne,
So Joanne is she's an Irish teenager. She was 16 at the time that we filmed her, and she was born with a very rare condition called total amelia, which means she's got no limbs. She's one of only 7 people in the world living with this condition. And we came across her, and it's amazing because she is obviously severely disabled, but within minutes of talking to her, you forget that she's got any disability at all, because she's got a, it sounds kind of corny to say, but she has got a really huge personality, and there is nothing in life that will stop her doing exactly what she wants to do. So we made a half-hour documentary for My Life, which then, did you want to say, Kes?
Yeah, so what you're going to see is a cut-down version of that, which is
It's 3 minutes. So we start off with a 30-minute, then we made a 15-minute, and then we made a 3-minute. And ironically, the 15-minute and the 3-minute have completely different content, just because different parts work for the different durations. So we're going to show you the 3-minute that hasn't been, well, it hasn't gone online yet.
Yeah, so it will be made for online use to encourage other children to send their stories in. So let's have a look at it. I think she's quite an extraordinary girl. She's quite an incredible girl.
She is absolutely amazing. Kind of almost brings tears to my eyes just watching her every time.
Yeah, and you had access to the archive. We saw a little bit there. There's a lot more of it in the film. So her brother's been...
Yeah, her brother had been filming her a lot at the beginning of her life, and then they had a bit of a gap, and then kind of he started making a feature film about her as well. So there was loads of incredible archive from when she was tiny, and just, the whole story of how, she was kind of, they tried to give her artificial limbs, but, she was having none of it. And to this day, she's not interested in artificial limbs, but, she was like a robot that could just be bossed about and pick up things when she drops them.
And she lives now, she's at college.
She's now at university, living independently, so she's had her mum as her carer all her life up to this point. And so, she's now got 2 full-time carers who kind of rotate on shifts, and as she said, she's having a ball. And I think the thing that is so amazing about her is, her life is in many ways very normal. She's very popular, has an incredible group of friends who, some are still now with her at university as well. And then, in other ways, her daily challenges are just tremendous as well. So it's kind of getting that balance in the film. And I think what works for us is that, she just tells her story, she tells how it is, and it doesn't feel kind of voyeuristic or patronising, primarily because she's voiced it, I think.
Yeah.
And, it's her story, and it's her doing, it's not about her disability, but you obviously get a great insight into her disability through watching it.
Yeah. I think it's really powerful. I think what both those films have in common is a really strong kid at the centre who is completely in control of telling their story. Yeah. Shall we have a look at the Burns one, which is... Do you want to say anything?
Well, what happened is I totally agree about it being very empowering once you allow your main contributor to voice the film. I think that's what kind of can turn things around. And actually... I know because we first did it back in 2009 with a film that we did for BBC Three called Small Team, Big World with Jazz Burkett. And what happened is that it did transform her experience day to day. As Jazz has got a form of dwarfism, and she lives in Colwyn Bay in North Wales, which isn't a big place, but she found when she went out, she did used to get bullied and stared at and shouted at by strangers, particularly young guys. But after she made the films with BBC Three, we made 6 films with her in the end, it did transform her day-to-day experience because it educated people. She was able to say to people how she felt about those things that were happening, and it transformed things. And when I was growing up, one of my best friend's sisters had 90% burns, and she was locked away at home. We barely ever saw her, even though I was around my friend's house all the time. She never went out. The feeling was that you should just, hide her away because people would stare. And to me, I think that's really, that's just, she had an awful life as a consequence of that. So for me, it's been something that's really important for people to be accepted for who they are, for difference to be accepted. And so the Burns Club is something that I was keen to make as a consequence of that.
So I think, again, really strong characters. And I love the bit on the beach where they are talking to each other in a peer-to-peer support way.
I mean, these short 3-minute versions, you know, we've just started doing them, haven't we? And obviously it's kind of, we filmed with Holly a couple of years ago when she made The My Life, so then she's kind of introducing it there as she is now, and then going back to, you know, the My Life segment. But they're going to be put online, aren't they, to encourage other children to send in their films.
So, we haven't quite started that site yet, but hopefully we'll get more stories in from children as a result of seeing their stories, which is lovely, really, really wonderful. So, Rachel, you don't just do that for us, oh no. Drummer makes a very, very successful series for us that whenever we show it, whatever slot it goes in, is really popular. I don't know whether you'd like to talk to us about School for Stars.
School for Stars, yeah. So School for Stars is it's an odd doc set in a performing arts school in London, the Italia Conti School. And we've made 3 series. Well, actually, we haven't made 3 series. We made 1 series with a different company. I don't want to kind of claim it all, but my business partner, it was her kind of idea. So, yeah, so the last 2 series have been Good Productions. And it is a really successful brand, and I think because it just feels very kind of genuine. It is, it's a mix of kind of glamour and grit. It's, I'd say, quite intimate and kind of honest, and it just portrays a whole range of people at this school who've all got a shared kind of ambition to be the future stars. And through the series, you know, people do go to auditions, and they are now the kind of the stars in EastEnders, Guy from Bad Education, Wolf Blood. So, you know, you're seeing these people at school. Yes, they're performing arts students, but then they get major roles. So I think, you know, that really appeals. So
should we have a look?
Watch a clip, which is a clip of one of the girls, Mimi, going for her audition to EastEnders. You don't even get to see the audition, but this has been taken and reposted online illegally. No, so it's, yeah, how
Right, she's great. She feels really normal.
Yeah, and I think that's what appeals. I mean, even in a way with Joanne and Burns, you know, all of them, the children can relate to them. So I think that's why they kind of hit this audience. And it's interesting what you were saying about kind of you would make programmes very differently for adults, because in some ways, actually, I know loads of adults love School for Stars, and it wouldn't. That programme wouldn't be that different.
I don't think it would. I think there's just natural editorial boundaries with some subjects, you know, like transgender, you know, you would cover in a different way, but yeah.
Because I don't think we often set out thinking we're making kids programmes, it's more kind of family and, yeah. So.
That's interesting.
Well, and also they want the same production values, don't they,
yeah,
kids?
They do.
That's what they're looking for, because they're watching lots of adult shows themselves.
Exactly.
So they want that level of storytelling, they want those sort of standout characters, and they don't want to feel like they're being palmed off with something that isn't quite as good.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And it always does really well on iPlayer, that one as well, which for our factual series, generally it's more dramas that kids seek out on iPlayer, but actually this one is one that does.
Yeah, because I think also it kind of feels almost like a vlog, in that you're seeing people who, you know, now you kind of know them as you know, in EastEnders or later in Bad Education, and so it's kind of getting the behind the scenes type feel when they're repeated.
Yes, it's a bit of an exclusive.
When you cast them, did you know that they were going to go somewhere?
I mean, that was the audition and you got the job, so yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you hope with Italia Conti, obviously, you know, it does produce lots of stars, so, and we did kind of promise stars, but yeah, thank God.
And you were I mean, that clip obviously had Mimi's mum there, but a lot of the time you're filming without the parents there.
Yeah, majority of the time.
Yeah.
And I think, in a way, because we kind of build trust with the parents, with the contributors, it's, you know, the parents aren't there, but, you know, they know they can always kind of come to us, or the children can come to us if there are any concerns. So in a way it kind of feels slightly less constrained because you haven't got parents, but then you've always got a responsible adult, and if that happens to be a teacher or, you know, I don't know, the coach in our ice skating series or whoever, they've got a different agenda, and sometimes they can kind of be more constraining because they're worried about how the school might appear or how they appear. So I don't know that necessarily parents bring constraints, it's just more that kind of protective side of parents, but once you've got the trust and you've got, you know, somebody who's on board, then I think, you know, it works really well.
Shall we go to iStars? I didn't know whether to do that now or later. Leave it to the end. Leave it to the end. Yeah. They're making a new series for CBBC that has not seen the light of day yet, so that would be a very rough cut. So let me turn to you, Alison. So you have exec and series produced, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Show me what you're made of, which is... Well, tell us about it.
Well, what we do is we take British kids to live across the world to live and work with the people that make their favourite things. Their kids, they describe themselves as spoilt. Their parents describe them as spoilt as well. And we sort of cast the net very wide across the country and find kids who are robust enough to leave their parents for 3 weeks and go abroad and go and genuinely try and do a job in a factory that might make their jeans or their trainers. They work on farms, they work in food production. And we've done 4 series abroad, and we've just finished a series in the UK. So this is from our Africa series that went out at Christmas. This was an adult format called Blood, Sweat and T-shirts, and basically we decided to try and make it for children. So we had to think how we would do that differently. So the first thing we did was introduce a presenter, Stacey Dooley, who was in the first series of Blood, Sweat and T-shirts, so she'd been through the whole experience herself. She could absolutely relate to anything that the kids were going through. And then the second thing that we did was we wanted to keep it authentic, but we also wanted to sort of introduce a light format, so we made it competitive, so that kids would actually, hang on in there, compete with each other. So it's still a real job that they're doing, that someone else is doing, but they've got something to focus on at the end of the day.
I'm interested in Stacey Dooley because she's a phenomenal presenter, I think, but not one that you would naturally think. She's not a CBBC presenter and does most of her stuff on BBC Three, but you were telling me earlier that the kids just love her. They absolutely
worship her.
Yeah.
I mean, they will follow her around. Within days, the girls are copying her hairstyles. They've all got Stacey Dooley ponytails. They copy her clothes. I mean, when we go out for dinner in the evening, they'll always be around Stacey's end of the table. And if something happens when we're on location, they'll come up to Stacey and say, "Come away from the other adults. We've got something to tell you." So, she really is like a big sister figure to them. And because she's done it herself, she's absolutely authentic. She's not performing a role. She's actually been in that situation herself. And also she's very passionate about showing kids things that maybe, people might think they shouldn't really see, but she thinks, no, they should see these things and it's important for them to understand them.
That's interesting, because I think she comes across as very authentic, which is a word that gets used a lot around vloggers and what kids are seeking out online. Yeah. And she's very non-patronising to the viewer as well as the kids that she's working with too, I think.
I mean, she's got... I mean, naturally, I think she would know... I mean, obviously, we all work together as a team. It is produced. But she has a natural sense herself of what the appropriate tone is with a child. And she never pushes it too far. Obviously, they're in very challenging situations a lot of the time, and she's always there to comfort them, but also, if they behave badly, she's there to sort of talk them through how it might be, if they change their behaviour either towards the job that they're doing or towards each other or their boss. Because a lot of these kids, they've sort of slightly taken over at home, and we have had a situation before with parents ringing us up and just actually asking us to take their children away. I mean, obviously, we wouldn't take a kid away if that was the case, because we have to sort of psych test the children and the parents, and we don't want the parents to be over anxious. Yes. But it just sort of shows you the level of anxiety that a lot of parents are in, because the children they want to do the best for their kids. They want to give them everything that they ask for. They want their kids to have a better life than they had, but somewhere along the line that's slightly gone wrong with some kids. And, we have kids that they have the biggest room in the house. The parents have actually given up their bedrooms for the child. They have every single piece of kit, Apple kit, that's possible to have. They might have £160 a month pocket money, and yet they're come from a single parent family. So it's quite sort of shocking stuff, really. But the joy of it all is that you take them away and they spend 3 weeks in different factories and farms, and they actually genuinely change. They come home, they work at school, they help around the house, they don't spend as much money. You know, it's like a real transformation.
And does that continue? Is that something that...
It does, yes. I mean, a lot of the kids, you know, we're in Series 5 now, but a lot of the kids, they're still in touch with us. I mean, the kids from Series 1, they raised money for a woman who lived on a rubbish dump in the Philippines, and she'd been separated from her children because she couldn't afford to bring them to live with her. And they, during the programme, they raised money to reunite her with her children, but they still now pay for her kids to go to school.
Good grief.
So that's a long-term, you know, commitment to somebody that they'll probably never see again.
And I think it is very relevant, and looking back to the slides we had at the top about 10 to 12-year-olds having more control in a family environment now than ever before, and that you've tapped into that and what they do with that control, potentially. And I wondered how you found the kids and the families.
Well, I mean, it's sort of the wonder of CBBC, really, because they all apply through the website. You know, we have, every year the numbers increase and we're up to 1,000. And we've got an exhaustive casting process. There's a lot of kids to get through. But, you know, you've got to take the right ones because, you know, you've got to find somebody funny for a start. They've got to be able to see something, react to it, and tell you exactly what they think. And it's actually those are the two key things. And of course they have to be genuinely spoilt and see themselves as spoilt, and their parents understand that they're spoilt as well. So you know, those are the sort of criteria that we apply. And
again, it's a very, very popular series on CBBC, and I think because it taps into that sense of, oh my God, what would I do if I was out there? And it's important, I think, to show kids in difficult environments, and it's one of the few places that we do that.
Yeah. I mean, we have to find, obviously it has to be appropriate for a child, where, you know, we've got, you know, health and safety protocols that we're following, you know, every step of the way. They've got chaperones with them 24/7 when we're away. But we are genuinely trying to make it a real experience for them. And it is something that even if you were the richest person on the planet, you couldn't buy that experience. So when they all come back, they're all, apart from being changed, they're all thrilled that they did it. And, I mean, one of the parents, we speak to them afterwards, after they come back, and one of the parents, she said to me that it was the best thing that ever happened to him and the best thing that ever happened to me. So, you
That's
know, you
amazing.
can't.
That's amazing. And you've got another clip as well.
Oh, yes. This is from our UK series, and they'll say things like, oh, you know, that you'd never see anybody living like that in the UK, or they might just be going back to a worker's house. And we came back and it was just like, well, that may have been the case before, but actually now there are people who are living on the other side of the tracks, you know, and we wanted to show them that those people exist in the UK, and also that actually there are lots of people in the UK who are trying to run a business in the UK. They're trying to get business back from China. They're trying to manufacture things here. That, you know, a lot of food production is done in this country. So we've actually taken them around the country. They've worked in different factories around the UK and on farms. And this clip is from a factory in Leicester. This guy's trying to basically rejuvenate the textiles industry in Leicester, and he's got this factory. It's a huge success. They sell to all the major supermarkets and shops that kids go into, as you know, as well. Topshop, River Island, etc. And we actually got them on a stitching line, and this is what happened.
This hasn't transmitted yet,
no,
so this is an exclusive.
This is a preview.
Oh.
This was Noah the little boy you see there, when we got them on the line, Noah was like an absolute genius at stitching. So the boss said to us, do you know what, instead of what we'd normally do is they get promoted and demoted, he said, I want to make him supervisor over the other kids. And a really interesting dynamic developed between the kids, because the other kids, he couldn't cope with telling them how to do things, and they, as you can see, they couldn't take him telling them what to do either. And so there was this revolt. And at the end of it, he wanted to sack them. And the boss had to explain to him that you can't just sack somebody in the UK. That isn't how it works. So they basically had a sort of very short, fast lesson in industrial relations, which went on. It became a theme throughout the series, where literally you'd have him saying, I'm never doing well at a job again because I don't ever want to be a supervisor. And then the girls were like, we want to be supervisors, we want to be supervisors. And when, of course, they became supervisors themselves, they found it as difficult as he did.
That's brilliant. That's going to, I think that will be, very popular and so relevant to now in terms of what's going on in the UK and the hidden businesses that our audience are so not aware of as they are putting their socks on in the morning or using their iPods.
Well, things genuinely are being made here, and lots of people are trying to, do that against very fierce competition from China. The textiles industry in Leicester was absolutely decimated, and when Mick started that factory, he was expecting to open the doors and there'd be a queue of people down the street to come and be stitchers, and they couldn't find anybody because the women just didn't want. They'd been so traumatised by what had happened to them, they didn't want to go back to work, so they actually had to go out and find all these middle-aged women who had previously been stitchers and then bring them back into work. And they also now train young people as well.
Brilliant story. So, going on to Claire, you've got a very different perspective on all this to what we've been doing so far in terms of where kids are at.
I suppose, my job's twofold, really. So, obviously, what I do is I try and use YouTube as a platform and try and find content from all the things that you guys have kind of talked about and make it appropriate for that platform, because it is such a sea of content on YouTube. There's so much. And then I suppose the other job that I do is act as an evangelist for the way that technology is changing the way that kids now watch and kids now consume content. So this kind of shows my age. Obviously, when I was growing up, you only really had 4 channels. So you kind of didn't have too much of a choice of what you kind of did, and you got these massive audiences. And as content has become much more fragmented in terms of just who's producing it and the amount of content that's being produced, but also in terms of the competition, I don't consider competition of the broadcasters anymore, for example. I consider it Minecraft, or I consider it people who are sat in their bedrooms with a camera making a vlog, or I consider it, anything where they're playing a computer, or they're watching someone else playing a computer game. So it's now one of these changing worlds where we've still got this amazing content that's being made, but we're fighting with competition of lots of different things that are taking away children's kind of eyeballs. So one of the things that Kez asked me to kind of look at was a little bit of what else is out there at the moment in terms of how is factual now represented, what are kids now watching in terms of kind of factual content. And one of the things I kind of said was about vlogging, because it's one of these big things, people talk about it, and it's very easy to kind of think, I just get a camera and I'll sit in my bedroom and I'll talk about what I ate for breakfast, millions of views. And it's sometimes when you kind of watch people talk about vloggers, you kind of see the big ones like Zoella, it's really simple to think that. And I think there's kind of been 2 things that have changed even in the last 10 years. And 10 years sounds like it should be quite a long time, but it actually hasn't been that long. So, in terms of context of TV content, David Tennant was Doctor Who 10 years ago. If you were like me and you kind of watched Friends, there's a reason why you can't see the Rachel and Ross scene on YouTube. It's because YouTube wasn't around when Friends had finished. That's how recent YouTube is as a phenomenon. But for obviously a 12-year-old, they've never known a world without it. So they are now in this world where it's like, this is how we consume content. It's not necessarily about something geographically sat there at 4 o'clock and we now have to sit there at 4 o'clock because you're telling us to. It's actually sometimes about, well, we want to watch what we want to watch because our friends have talked about it and we're going to go out and we're going to search for it, or we're going to subscribe to something, our favourite vloggers, and they're going to send the content to us. So this is the kind of like changing world that we have to think, well, we've got this amazing content, so how do we adapt it for this platform, one, and then two, who else is out there, so that we can kind of find out what the kids are interested in and what they're consuming. So the big change, as well as the platforms that content can go out on, is that these guys can now become content makers in themselves. So whereas kind of what you watched on TV is quite a passive experience, and it kind of relied on you having the money and the technology to kind of make TV, is a very expensive thing to do. Actually now, with a mobile phone, can pretty much film something and upload it online, and the kind of content that you're getting sometimes is really, like literally really quick. Something will trend, you have 48 hours to get onto that trend, and then it's gone. And then if you miss it, it's what all the trendy social media companies call dad cool. So, you know, I mean, if you try and get onto it 3 months later and do your own version of Uptown Funk, it's kind of too late, because, you know, the 12-year-old down the street with a camera will have done it a lot faster. So
that is a problem for broadcasters, is just being so fleet of foot, I think.
Yeah, and also it's interesting as well, because we make these absolutely beautiful documentaries, and we hone a lot of time and effort into building all these relationships. And what we're kind of, one of the kind of other competitions that we've got really with vloggers is the fact that we tell a story in kind of like these beautiful 30-minute chunks or in series. But what vloggers do is they literally have their host stories out there for the world to see, and it's kind of, you kind of see them in 2 or 3 minutes at a time, but Zoella's been on YouTube for since she was 14. So for the last 5 or 6 years, you're seeing her entire life, and what her subscribers are seeing is her life laid out bare with no kind of editorial remit in the way. And that's really interesting for us, because we could never do it as a corporate entity, but it's how we kind of harness, okay, so how can we take these guys, how can we work with them, how can we make what you guys are making fit the platforms that those guys are watching, and then at the same time, how can we learn or harness their power as well to kind of work with us for these audiences who are going elsewhere. So
do you want to have a look? Let's hope that we've still got...
I'll show really quickly. I mean, this was what was really interesting when you asked me, Kez, to kind of have a look, was I kind of found 2 Zoella clips. So Zoella's this really big, probably the biggest YouTuber from UK at the very least. She's got about 9 million subscribers.
And it does go on, but if you look, over 4 million hits, and we know that a lot of those will have been in the age bracket of CBBC viewers.
And it is really interesting, because as well as obviously what she kind of shows, and it's, she says shit on it, she said it's completely, there's no editorial, it's just, her kind of putting it out there. But the other thing, the flip of that, is this really slick, beautiful documentary that was then made by a really famous documentary maker called The Creators. And that was something that was a long form, so it's quite a 30-minute documentary. It went on YouTube, it kind of talked about the phenomenon on YouTube and vloggers. And it was really interesting that the reception of it hasn't been anywhere near as popular as individual YouTubers' videos has.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it is really interesting how, that kind of passive experience of when you kind of do this beautiful, slick, lots of different shot sizes, lots of different establishing shots, beautifully lit, and then kids just kind of went, oh yeah, but actually what we want to watch is her talking to us in the camera, because that's what we kind of engage with. So I thought that was a really interesting change, and it's almost like, I'm not saying that one is right over the other in any way, but it is interesting how different platforms have different ways that people can kind of engage with them. I think if you kind of put Zoella's vlog on TV, I don't think it would work in the same way. You know, I think people would want that personalised experience of a mobile phone or a tablet in their hand, or, you know, them just sat in their bedrooms watching her. It's not that kind of family viewing that you'd have.
So knowing that more and more children are now accessing YouTube, that they are watching, they're more likely to be on the internet than watching TV on the family TV, do you think these kind of things are dead? Do we think that there is no room for it?
No, not.
Or how would we make the content that we've all been looking at so far relevant to this kind of a world?
And I'm just doing this from one point of view as well, because I'm not speaking for everyone else out there. But I think what's really interesting is almost how we adapt what is being made as kind of a linear, long-form show, and we kind of take bits of it that we think will work for a different platform. So what might work, say, on Twitter, or what might work on Facebook, or what might work on Instagram, is you could tell the same story on Instagram, but through still images in a very different way. So it's, for us, like, for example, I'm sure we're going to show the School for Stars later on, but what we've tried to do with that is have a think about, instead of just taking a clip from the show, which is what you would expect as part of a trail or a little bit of a profile, we thought, well, what works well on YouTube? And one of the really big things that has done really well in the last year or so is an artist called Sia. And she kind of makes these beautiful videos with a little girl called Maddie, who was actually on a documentary herself called, what was it called? Dance Mums, I think it was on in America. And she did this beautiful, like, kind of 4-minute artistic video to a song called Chandelier. So we just thought, well, why don't we do something like that? We've got these amazing ice skaters who are amazing performers. Instead of us doing a kind of straight way to introduce them, let's introduce them to this piece of video that is a piece of art in itself, that is beautiful. And then that way, what you're doing is you're kind of putting that out on YouTube as a way of, instead of just going and promoting the show, that becomes a piece of content in itself. Hopefully people will be interested in that. If we get a good, really good, say, commercial artist as well that people are going to search for on YouTube, then that's a different way of reaching people that isn't necessarily just us putting a trailer out on our existing channels to our existing audiences. It's trying to reach a new and different audience that might not have known about this before. Because I think that is the biggest challenge, is no longer when you don't have 4 channels and you don't have a guarantee of 25% of the audience share, or, you know, them watching you, because there are, I think, 62 children's channels alone in the UK. What you struggle to do is get this content out there, and what you struggle to do is even let people know that this exists, because we're not the X Factor, we're not Strictly, we're not soaps where we have magazines and newspapers talking about us, or our celebs aren't falling out of nightclubs, you know, that people are taking photos of. So we have to find cleverer ways for people to find our content, and I think it's more about, that's part of the evangelical side of how we use the changing ways that people consume content to promote, because I think that, you know, 85% of people are still watching TV. I don't think at all that it's gone away, but it's more about how do we take that to help promote it and support it and kind of push back.
Is TV dead?
No, not at all.
People have been saying that for 15 years, and just for 20 years when the internet first started here. And, no, people love watching television, and it's really interesting, I think, everything that Claire's been saying, and that comparison of kind of the number of people who, you know, will watch So Ella getting upset in comparison with those that will watch her in a nicely put together video. And it is quite worrying for us, but I think what we have to do is see it as a creative challenge. And I do think Video Diary, which again has been around for 20 years or more, you know, is a fantastic way of kind of getting some of that unmediated feel into our documentaries. And it's very reasonable, you know, tiny cameras are so cheap these days.
And also kids are used to filming themselves, you know, they copy what's happening on YouTube and they do it themselves at home. I mean, part of our casting process is that we actually get them to do a little video for us, so they film themselves. And honestly, some of them, you can be there for 3 days and it's just like, have we got to the end yet? Because they just love talking about themselves and filming themselves. So, you know, what we do as well now is we actually give them a little camera. And again, we have to wade through hours of stuff before we find any gems. But it is something that they naturally do because, like you say, they're growing up with that now. They understand it. I mean, I think with that documentary, that's about her, isn't it? Whereas the other thing is it's made by her. It's much more immediate. It's much more intimate. You can tell that there's another hand at play. And I think that's what the big difference is. So I can see why you'd want to just literally be, you know, talking to her, have her talking to you, and also they can talk back, can't
yes. they? And I think again that's a technological change, and that's one of the things that, you know, every YouTube. We did a lot of research around different YouTube channels before we set up, on every single YouTube channel that we kind of spoke to said one of the big great things about this is that they can comment. And sometimes people will look at the comments before they will even watch the video. You know, they'll use the comments as a way to kind of say, oh, is this worth me watching? Because, you know, 5 minutes is quite important of my time. So what they can do, and, you know, Earth Unplugged was a really good example of a channel that kind of started off with kind of people who'd done very kind of traditional VTs, so they'd started off with this long establishing shot, and then they'd gone into their lovely kind of explaining, 30 seconds explaining it all at the beginning, and people just, and the good thing is you can kind of track it, so you can kind of see where people are leaving the video, and they just saw that like 40% of people had gone in the first 20 seconds, and they just went, right, forget the establishing shot, forget the 30-second intro, we're going straight into the volcano shot where it was. And from that point they were seeing that their stats were, and then they went, well, what do you guys want? And then everyone started commenting and started going, well, what we want is we want to see, they had this amazing video that they did with Red Bull, which was basically a guy, the fastest biker in the UK versus a falcon. So they put some meat on the biker's head and the falcon had to chase it. And it was a beautiful, beautiful piece of video. But then everyone was just going, well, we just want to see what the falcon has done because he's got a camera on his head. Can we just see 7 minutes of that, please? And they released that and they got like hundreds of thousands of views. So being able to kind of talk to people and have them kind of comment really quickly and be involved, I suppose, with that kind of editorial process was really valuable for them. And it's a kind of, because sometimes when you feed back to like 1 or 2 people, or you're kind of just saying, well, what do you think? It's a very kind of subjective opinion. Whereas when you have like a group decision, which can go, you know, the other way as well, is that sometimes you do get YouTubers who then get stuck into having to do a certain thing. And when they try and do something different, or the fans are up in arms because they're like, oh, well, no, that's not what you do. Why are you playing a game that we don't know, or we don't like that? Or so it's you know, it's an interesting world, really.
So the potential to interact more and hear more and deliver what the audience want is huge now. We do still have those constraints on CBBC in terms of you shouldn't even be on YouTube if you're under 13. But you're feeling that that's the way it will go in terms of just finding out more about the audience, them having more say.
And I think a lot of, it's not just us, I think a lot of broadcasters and a lot of people who are seeing the changing world are trying to work out, well, how do we take these things that actually don't work for us as a platform into what we do and into what we make. So, you know, one of the things that we have is dramas. We have these amazing dramas, but they're usually shot a year in advance. So if we're then going, well, what do you think we should change about the drama? It's like, well, we can't really do anything for another year. And a year in a child's lifetime is quite a big difference. So it's trying to figure out what works. But at the same time, you know, the other thing I know is that YouTube are trying desperately to make long form work for them. So they're going, well, how do we get these beautiful, high quality, brilliant production values, people with years and years of experience onto our platform? Because actually, at the moment, they can't work out a way to monetize it, or they can't work out a way to actually make it work for those people. So it's kind of, on one hand, there's the changing audiences, but then on the other hand, it's interesting that YouTube are trying to become a legitimate broadcaster themselves, but really struggling with it because they just can't fund it at the same level as someone sat there with a camera. So I think now's a really, really interesting change in tide. When they do figure it out, that'll be interesting as well.
So there's a lot of talk about short form, isn't there, in terms of that working better on YouTube, like you were saying, or on other platforms. And
sorry, can I just make a point?
Yeah.
Which is that I think that television is sort of fighting back, but also taking advantage. The main thing with YouTube, I think, is not only is it very intimate, but also that it is an interaction between the person broadcasting and the person watching it. And so I think that, telly is fighting back with Twitter because, all the big brands use Twitter all of the time. They all have a hashtag. People are watching and commenting at the same time. So I don't think it's about, let's just give up. YouTube is going to take over because I don't think, who's to say what will happen? But, there's just what you're trying to do is just engage with the audience much more all of the time. And, Twitter is just one way of doing that.
And you will still get TV at the moment is still something that can be offered that, YouTube cannot offer, which is that shared simultaneous experience that you can get with millions of people, which is why Twitter works so well as a kind of second screen. I missed Game of Thrones yesterday. And I avoided any kind of social network as a result because I just know that everyone is going to be sat there going, oh my God, did you watch that? And that kind of shared community that you can get from TV and the social network, you can't really still get from YouTube, from people kind of disparately engaging with it at random times, maybe 6 months apart. So it is, I don't think in any way, shape or form it's about one over the other. Cinema didn't die when TV came along, radio hasn't died as a result of video coming along. So it's one of those but what we have to try and do is then go, okay, we can't abandon these new networks as well, and we can't just pretend they're not happening, because they're out there, and kids are a really good example of an audience that are going to be leaders in terms of how the mainstream is going to change, because they're early adopters. So they will change first, and then the mainstream will change. So if we can get it right for kids, and we can work out what's going on with them, and we can make them understand that we are a leader in this area, and they will take us seriously as a leader in that area, that's when we will then be able to follow on with the mainstream. So it's a fascinating audience and fascinating journey.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, I think. And what I'm hearing from everybody is TV's not dead, but how we make content for different platforms is crucial if we're going to still engage with kids who aren't on Twitter or might be on Twitter, but we can't quite do that yet, making CBBC content.
Okay.
But bringing to them stuff that they can interact with is important, as well as brilliant docs on TV. Shall we just do a little sneak of iStars before we wrap up and ask if there's any questions? So you mentioned, Claire, about thinking of different ways of promoting shows and doing a performance. Do you want to talk a bit about?
Yeah, so iStars it's kind of a follow-on from School for Stars in a way, and it was looking for another kind of precinct that we could look at the lives of children, ordinary children doing something extraordinary. So we've been filming at the National Eye Centre in Nottingham, and it's a 10-part series that's going to start TXing in September. And this is the first public exclusive
So it's
screening.
offline.
So, yeah, offline. So any comments, do feedback. Now time we'll potentially change something.
And not the right voiceover.
Not the right
director's
no, it's
voiceover.
Directors and a mix and match of directors and all sorts of people's voiceover. So yeah, but it gives a sense of the series. Oh, actually, maybe I'll just quickly explain what this little clip is.
Yes.
So basically, it's about ice dance, which maybe not everybody knows about the details of ice skating, because I certainly didn't. But ice dance you have to do in a partnership with a boy and a girl, and there are loads of girls who love ice dance, and there's hardly any boys. So when a boy comes along, every girl is desperate to have him as their partner, because without a boy you can't compete in the Olympics. You can just do kind of, solo ice dance competitions. If you get a boy, you can be the next tournament dean. And a new boy is in town.
Of course.
A very handsome, lovely young boy.
So, will Chloe find a new partner? Have to watch. So I wonder, before we close, whether there's any comments or questions anybody has of these amazing programme content makers here. Oh, yes, we have a...
At the moment, I don't think that's the case at the moment. But who knows in the future, I suppose.
Because of our age restraints on CBBC, and we can't, YouTube has to be a promotional channel for our content elsewhere.
But we creatively think of lots
of... So, for example, commissioning content separately, you hopefully will be commissioning extra content for the iStars, for Operation Ouch, you commissioned a zombie sketch.
So yeah, I suppose it's kind of still supports the long form of the show at the moment. How that will change in terms of, will there ever be original stuff that's just on YouTube that's not linked to long form? I suppose it's something that everyone's discussing at the moment, not just us. I think a lot of BBC Free Thinking is around that at the moment and how that works. So I'm sure we'll get an answer to it at some point, but not at this particular moment in time.
There's the little 3-minute My Lives that are being, we're encouraging kind of young people to make. That they'll just sit online. Won't
they'll be online on our website.
As opposed to YouTube.
Yeah, they'll be on YouTube as well, but that will be promoting the online site. Yeah, which will be interesting with the My Life, encouraging kids to send in their own stories. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
I was interested in you saying that editorially, maybe a few of the tweets that you make didn't bring forward, but generally speaking, your approach actually was a program. I was wondering, when you get to post-production, given that there's sort of tendency for short form and attention spans were told are quite short, do you just take it as read that you can make a program for a young person when you would an adult, or do you think about things like edits and stylistically and put it together that might capture a child's attention?
Well, the edit is absolutely crucial, because we do have to acknowledge that they do have a shorter attention span, and so you do have to make every part of your story has to be a quick hit, because you have to recognise that they may well, you can't guarantee that they're going to stay to the end. You've got to try and get them to the end, but you want it to be so that they will, you want your characters, you want the best bits of sync, as you would anyway, but it's just, you want lots of music as well to keep them hooked, because, dead air on CBBC, it just doesn't happen. So sometimes you'll sit in an edit and you'll think, actually I just really like this to breathe now, but you can't let it breathe. You have to keep cutting and keep adding music. And that is a major difference, I think, between making programmes for children and programmes for adults.
As well, the whole way through, kind of every little sort of section has a cliffhanger to drive you to the next. But then saying that, I do think with children, once they kind of are hooked into a brand or a series, it's amazing how much they will watch. I mean, they'll kind of literally just watch back to back a whole series and then start again and kind of watch it through. So it's
and when you want to make them cry, you do have to slow it down. That's
obviously, yes.
That's the main trick of making it much more emotionally engaging, is to slow the pace right down. It really helps. But I think in terms of kind of what was tricky with the transgender programme is, obviously we wanted to explain how hormone blockers work, but to do that we had to look at, there's a lot of neurological evidence of how people who are transgender actually have different brains. There's that shows that you can have a male brain, female body, and vice versa. And so our producer-director Phil came up with this really lovely idea of having like a factory setting with stick figures kind of going along. They're slightly more filled out than stick figures, but essentially that was the idea, and kind of brains dropping in, and then a kind of a blue kind of male brain dropping into a pink female body, and vice versa, just to kind of explain that. And then the editor came up with the idea, and then we had kind of, the whole kind of hormone thing to explain again in a child-friendly way. And we did that through kind of showers, that were these showers of hormones that during adolescence. And then the editor came up with the idea of let's add an umbrella for the hormone blocker, kind of stopping, the hormones coming through. So it's kind of a nice collaborative process, but trying to kind of make sure it was very clear, because it's hard even for adults to understand, I think. So, we wanted to make sure it was absolutely clear for the children.
It's a good question, that, actually, because you're right, it does slightly change the way you edit something.
And actually that use of animation for complicate, because with Joanne as well, we had a kind of animation with her arms and legs, like a kind of cut out figure being chopped off and the rod being put up her spine to straighten her up. And kind of to get all of that information through documentary would have been probably a turn off for most kids, but you still need to put that information across.
So it's not what you say, it's the way you say it again. Yes. Brilliant. Is there any more questions, thoughts? No? Well, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much, Kat, Rachel, Alison and Claire. It's been really interesting.